My name is Jasmine, and I have lived my entire life in a small, remote English countryside where the landscape seems unchanging and time flows with the slowness of pastures, following the natural rhythm of the earth. I have never known the frenzy of cities or the chaos of metropolises. For decades, my life has been marked by working with my husband, George, and taking care of our sheep. Every day started at dawn and ended long after the sun had set. Our work knew no breaks or vacations. Not even holidays like Christmas or Easter could stop us. While most families gathered around decorated tables to celebrate together, we were in the fields, checking on the livestock. Yet, never before have I felt so vulnerable as I do now, at the age of 69. Lately, I have begun to reckon with the passing years and my fears, particularly the fear of death. And when the doctors told me I would need head surgery, that fear turned into an obsession. The operation was urgent. There was no time to lose, and this was clear to everyone. The tumor they had discovered was growing too fast, and the risk of leaving it was greater than facing the surgery. However, despite everything, I couldn't calm my mind. I was terrified at the thought of entering the operating room. I have always feared death, and this thought began to accompany me more insistently in recent years. Every time I prayed, and I prayed twice a day, morning and evening, hoping that God could drive away my fears, I felt the presence of death like a shadow, close and inexorable. The truth is, I didn't know what it would be like after the surgery. I had heard of surgical operations that, even if successful, left people changed, no longer the same mentally or physically. A small mistake, a neglected detail, and I could lose my independence, my ability to think clearly, to walk, to live as before. The mind is a delicate thing, and I knew they were about to touch my brain. It was impossible not to think of the worst. To make matters worse, in recent years, I had remained essentially alone. My husband George, despite the affection that binds us, was often away. He spent much of his time with the sheep, tending to them, taking them to graze. I was accustomed to that solitude, but the truth is that in recent years it weighed on me more and more. Our children had also drifted away. The reason? Me. I cannot hide behind excuses. The truth is that when they were little, I had snubbed them. I had never treated them as children in the true sense of the word, as kids to love and cuddle. They had become, for George and me, more like helpers than children. We couldn't afford to be indulgent or generous with them, neither materially nor emotionally. Our days were always the same. We worked from morning till evening, and even on holidays like Christmas or Easter, the livestock came first. The sheep had to be cared for, fed, and protected, which meant that our family was always secondary. For years I justified all this with necessity. We had no alternatives. We had to survive. But over time, my children drifted away, and now they have their own families, their lives in the city. And I found myself here, in this old farmhouse, reflecting on everything I have lost, on everything I could have done differently. Every day I regret not having given them the time and affection they deserved. Regrets, they say, always come too late, and in my case, they arrive just when I am facing the possibility of no longer being here. So, when the day of the operation arrived, I was full of anxiety and regrets. I had a rosary in my right hand, the small symbol of my faith that never left me. I didn't know if it would really protect me, but I needed to feel that there was something, someone greater than me, taking care of what was about to happen. The doctor told me I could keep it during the operation, a small comfort in such a difficult moment. As they prepared me, the nurse explained what would happen, but her words were like background noise. I couldn't concentrate on her. My heart was pounding, and my mind was elsewhere. I thought about what would happen if something went wrong. I thought about the possibility of not waking up, or worse, waking up but no longer being myself. The line between life and death seemed so thin, and I felt completely exposed. They took me to the operating room, and when they finally began to administer the anesthesia, I felt a sudden wave of tiredness. The world around me became blurred, and the last thing I remember was the doctor's hand on my shoulder. a kind gesture, as if to reassure me. When I woke up, or so I thought, I found myself in a condition I had never experienced before. I was no longer lying on the operating table, yet I knew I was still in the room. I felt light, weightless. I looked down, and to my great astonishment, I saw my body lying on the operating table, surrounded by the doctors working on me. It was a surreal scene, as if I were a spectator of my own life, a shadow floating above everything. I tried to move, but I had no control over my ethereal body. I floated effortlessly above the scene. No one could see me, and I couldn't communicate with them. A terrible thought crossed my mind. Was I dead? Had I left my body and was now observing the last moments of my life? Panic began to rise, but I had no control over my emotions. I wasn't afraid in the traditional sense, but a deep sense of discomfort enveloped me. It was as if I knew something was wrong, that I had to do something to go back, but I didn't know how. Then, without warning, I felt a powerful force pulling me downward. It wasn't a pleasant sensation. It was as if someone or something was grabbing me and dragging me down violently. I tried to resist, to oppose that force, but it was too strong. Before I could realize it, I had been torn away from the operating room and projected into a completely different place. The place I found myself in was terrifying, arid, and suffocating. There was no doubt in my mind. I was in hell. It wasn't the kind of hell I had imagined as a child when the Bible described eternal flames and fire. No, this place was different, but equally unsettling. The air was heavy, almost unbreathable, and wherever I looked, I saw only desolation. I walked, or at least tried to, even though I didn't feel my feet touching the ground. I didn't know where I was going, but a force was pushing me to move, to continue. There was nothing around me, no sound, only oppressive emptiness. But then, in the distance, I saw something. It was a huge building, a palace I immediately recognized. Buckingham Palace. But it wasn't like I had seen it on television or in pictures. The palace was enveloped in a dark, almost menacing atmosphere, and its appearance was deteriorated, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. I couldn't believe my eyes. What was Buckingham Palace doing in a place like that? Without a second thought, I approached the building. The palace was drawing me in, as if there was an invisible force pushing me closer, even though everything inside me was screaming to run away. It didn't seem like the place I wanted to be, but I couldn't stop. The walls of Buckingham Palace were blackened and cracked, as if they had been burned or abandoned for an infinite time. There was no life, no beauty, only a sense of desolation and abandonment. The palace doors, which I always remembered as majestic, were wide open and inviting, but in the most unsettling way possible. I entered with a mix of curiosity and terror. The interior was even darker and gloomier than I had imagined. There was no light, only dense shadows and oppressive silence, occasionally broken by distant groans of suffering that made me shiver. The grand halls and corridors I had seen in photos, with sparkling chandeliers and royal carpets, were now dark and empty, as if life itself had been sucked out of the palace. I hadn't walked far when I realized I wasn't alone. In front of me, sitting on a massive throne, was a figure I immediately recognized despite the spectral environment. It was Queen Elizabeth II. However, her image was far from the imposing and dignified figure the whole world had always known. She was pale, with an expression of deep sorrow on her face. Her eyes seemed empty, devoid of the light of someone who had lived a full and satisfying life. She wore worn and torn clothes, so different from the elegant robes I was used to seeing on television or in newspapers. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The Queen, one of the most powerful and respected women in the world, was there, trapped in that place of suffering. I tried to approach her, and when I finally stood in front of her, she looked at me with tired, almost resigned eyes. "Why are you here?" I asked her, my voice trembling with disbelief and fear. For a moment she didn't respond, keeping her gaze fixed in the void. It seemed as if she wanted to avoid me, as if she didn't want or couldn't speak about what had brought her to that place. But then, slowly, she began to speak. Her voice was weak, but every word was imbued with profound sadness, as if each sentence carried the weight of a lifetime of regrets. "I spent my entire life serving my nation," she said, "but I neglected the most important thing, my children." Her words struck me like a whip. I felt my heart tighten in my chest, immediately recognizing my own guilt in her words. "I was always too busy with my royal duties," she continued. "The crown, the protocol, the engagements, everything came before them. I treated my children not as children to love, but as future monarchs. I put duty before affection, and they paid the price for that choice." Her confession left me speechless. I never imagined that such a powerful and influential figure, who had led an entire nation for decades, could feel so crushed by the weight of personal decisions. But her words resonated deeply within me because I knew that I had done the same with my children. Like the Queen, I had put work before them. I had never been a truly affectionate mother. My children grew up without feeling loved, without receiving attention or affection, and in the end, they drifted away, just like the Queen's children. And now, in that moment, I realized how terrible that choice had been. It was a bitter lesson that I never wanted to learn in that way. "Elizabeth," I whispered, unable to hold back the tears. "How did you end up here?" "This is my castle," she replied. "But here there is no power, no glory, only a life of regrets and loneliness. I am here to atone for my greatest sin, not having loved as I should have. This is the price I pay for forgetting love." Her words echoed in my mind like a warning. I was terrified at the thought that I, like her, could end up in such a place of torment, full of remorse for what I had neglected in my life. "Please," she suddenly said, taking my hand with unexpected strength. "Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't let it be too late to love your children. Don't wait to regret when you can no longer do anything." Those words were like a violent wake-up call. I had to do something. I had to change. I looked at my hand, incredibly surprised to see that I was still holding the rosary. A small golden glow shone between my fingers, and in that moment, I remembered that I wasn't dead. Not yet. I was still fighting for my life in that operating room. I realized that I had been brought to that place to learn a lesson. A hard but necessary lesson. I had to go back. I had to change the course of my life before it was too late. "Jesus!" I shouted loudly. "Please, help me!" My voice echoed in the void, and suddenly, a blinding light enveloped me. Everything around me vanished. The Queen, the palace, the emptiness of hell. I was enveloped in a warm sensation of peace. Then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a hospital bed. The room's light was dim, and I heard the constant beeping of machines monitoring my vital signs. I was alive. I had made it. But the relief was mixed with a new awareness. I couldn't waste even a single day more. I had to repair what I had broken. There was no one by my side when I woke up. George couldn't leave the sheep alone, and my children didn't even know about the surgery. After 2 days of observation, an ambulance came to take me home. I was tired, worn out from the surgery and the shocking experience I had lived through. As the ambulance traveled along the gravel roads leading to our old farm, I thought about everything I had seen. I could no longer ignore my children. I could no longer live with that resentment and guilt. I had to seek them out, go to them, ask for forgiveness, and rebuild a bond that I had broken years ago. When we arrived at the farm, however, there was a surprise. As soon as the ambulance stopped, I saw something I didn't expect. George and our children were there, all together, in front of the house door. They were holding a large sign that read, "Welcome home, Mom." I couldn't believe it. They had been waiting for me, thinking of me. Tears began to stream down my face. I had never felt such emotion. I had never felt so loved. My heart, which for years had been hard as stone, melted instantly. After that incredible experience, I convinced George to change our lives. We could no longer live as before, isolated and absorbed by the farm work. We decided to sell the sheep and buy a small house in the city. It was a difficult decision. We had spent our entire lives in the countryside, and changing meant giving up everything we knew. But we knew it was necessary. At first, it was hard to adapt. The city was noisy and hectic, so different from the calm and silence of the fields. But over time, we got used to it. To make a living, George and I started doing gardening jobs for our neighbors. And ironically, we earned more than we had ever made with the sheep. Our children were surprised and happy about our change. Finally, we had found a way to be a family. On Sundays, we spent time together, as I had always wanted to do when they were little. I felt as if I had been given a second chance. I have never told anyone about my vision or the encounter with Queen Elizabeth II. I think that if I did, people would think I was crazy. Who would believe that I saw the Queen in hell? Yet, I know it was real. Every time I think of her, I pray for her soul and mine. I learned so much from that brief encounter, and that lesson changed me forever. Now, I always carry a photo of the Queen in my wallet, a small reminder of that experience. And on my right hand, right where I held the rosary during the operation, I got a small rosary tattooed. It is a symbol of rebirth, proof of the miracle I lived through. People look at me in astonishment when they see the tattoo, especially at my age. Some think it's crazy to get a tattoo at 70, but for me, it's a symbol too important to hide. Now, on the threshold of my 70th year, I realize how precious life is. I have learned that material things, work, and daily worries have no value if you don't give love and affection to those around you. Regrets can crush us if we don't learn to forgive ourselves and try to make amends for our mistakes. The message I carry with me is simple. Live life with love. Love your children, your loved ones, and don't let small disputes or resentments keep you away from them. Life is short, and forgiveness is the most important teaching that Jesus has given us. I have understood that there is nothing more important than love and forgiveness. And even though I have made mistakes, I now know that I can make amends. Thanks to that experience, I was given a second chance. I will not waste it.